Hey everyone, welcome to Licks of the Beast. My name is Nico, and this video is one that I never thought I would make. For me, as I'm sure it is for many of you, Ozzy Osbourne has always just been there, like the sun or the moon. You sometimes go days without looking up at the sky, but you know that anytime you do, that's where it'll be. So when I saw the news that Ozzy had passed away, I just wasn't ready. As a kid, I wanted to play guitar because of Randy Rhoads and J.K. Lee, and Carlos Cavazo too from Quiet Riot. But I didn't fall in love with the instrument from listening to Randy or Jake jam by themselves. It was from discovering the incredible songs on Ozzy's first 3 albums way back in 1984 that I really fell in love with heavy metal and with the idea of playing guitar. Now, I didn't start playing until a few years later, but since then, I've played guitar for multiple hours pretty much every day, and I still do. So being a guitar player is a huge part of my identity, and I wouldn't be who I am, and I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for Ozzy. The truth is, everyone who enjoys heavy metal music, be it as a fan, a musician, or both, has Ozzy Osbourne to thank for it to one degree or another. And while there isn't a single part of me that wants to make this video, I hope I can help transition from this moment of mourning to a celebration of the truly wonderful music that is Ozzy's legacy. So we're going to look back at what I would consider to be the first part of Ozzy's solo career, from his first album after parting ways with Black Sabbath until his first attempt at retirement in 1992. And I hope that any younger viewers will find this helpful as a guide to the different facets of Ozzy's career, their key moments, and the guitarists who gave those songs their unique sound, energy, and flavor. Now, for me personally, it all started with Randy Rhoads, as Blizzard of Ozz was the second heavy metal album I ever bought. The first was Metal Health by Quiet Riot, just a week or two earlier. And Blizzard of Ozz is just an incredible way to start a solo career. Every song is top-notch and everything sounds really unique. Ozzy's melodies are so iconic and so catchy. I'll never understand how he did it. But it's a record that stays with you from the very first listen. If I had to recommend any standout tracks, just listen to the album from start to finish, because this is a masterclass in songwriting, arranging, performance, and in how to put together a killer heavy metal album. I Don't Know and Suicide Solution are great examples of how a simple riff can sound huge and be used as the main driver for an unforgettable song. And Crazy Train is literally the blueprint for a heavy metal single. A powerful, dark, melodic riff that highlights both minor second intervals of the Aeolian mode, shifting back and forth between a minor key and its relative major, how to play a bass line that works with the drums and both supports and augments the guitar lines accordingly. And for a guitar player, you have all the basics. Different uses of natural harmonics, you got fills, controlled palm muting, power chords, inverted triads, tapping, legato, alternate picking, bends, and how to create a guitar solo that really stands out as a song within the song. Diary of a Madman is a very interesting follow-up to that first album. It was released only a year later, and for how great it is, it's well documented for having been overly rushed. Getting it out quick was prioritized over making it the best it could be, and as a result of that, it didn't quite reach its full potential. But in spite of that, the album is still amazing and the songs are really strong. Now, what has always stood out to me in particular is how the album's sound perfectly reflects the title and the cover art. Something about it sounds haunted and eerie. As a kid, this album scared me a little. Not in the sense that I was afraid to listen to it, but you know when you watch a horror movie and you're kind of worried about how your mind is going to mess with you afterwards? Like that. The standout tracks for me are Over the Mountain, Flying High Again, SATO, Sato, however you want to call it, and the title track. All 4 songs have incredibly catchy melodies, fantastic lyrics, and impeccable guitar solos. Randy actually really stood out on this album, and he actually improved from Blizzard of Ozz. Now, like Crazy Train, these are literally blueprints for heavy metal songwriting and guitar playing. You Can't Kill Rock and Roll and Tonight are also wonderful songs with depth and power. Unfortunately, Randy Rhoads was tragically killed in a freak airplane crash, and this took an unbelievable toll on Ozzy, and it can be argued that he never fully recovered from that loss. Because this was the early 1980s and just everything was full steam ahead, Ozzy had to fulfill contractual obligations with Jet Records, and they wanted a live Black Sabbath tribute album. So without any time to work through the grief of Randy's passing, he, along with Rudy Sarzo and Tommy Aldridge, had to finish the Diary of a Madman tour and then record a good live set of Sabbath songs. And that's exactly what they did. With Night Ranger guitarist Brad Gillis, who, poor guy, had a mere 3 days to learn the set, they put on some fantastic performances, and they released Speak of the Devil, which is a remarkable live album. Check out Iron Man, Children of the Grave, Snowblind, The Wizard, and Symptom of the Universe. Ozzy is just wild on this one, as is the entire band. And this might sound laughable to many hardcore fans, but those are some of my absolute favorite versions of the classic Black Sabbath songs. As a side note, Brad Gillis's guitar tone on that album is absolutely perfect, and I would love to know what his exact rig was back then. Immediately after all this craziness, Ozzy managed to regroup and find another monster guitar player and composer with the perfect stage presence to capture the imagination of 1980s metalheads. The one and only Jake E. Lee. With Jake, Ozzy released 2 albums, Bark at the Moon in late 1983 and then The Ultimate Sin in the summer of 1986. Both are very different sounding albums, both in terms of their overall sound in the context of 80s heavy metal and in comparison to one another. Bark at the Moon is a bit darker and a little more somber in tone, but I think it's a great classic Ozzy album. If nothing else, for the mega iconic title track and its music video, which is in line with the campy but awesome cover art. That title track has one of the most recognizable riffs in Ozzy's entire catalog. It's got outstanding vocal melodies and a legendary guitar solo that I think is up there with the very best in heavy metal. It also has a wicked outro that actually adds an entirely new layer to the song and makes it that much better. Other standout songs to me are You're No Different, more of a synth-driven song, but I love that about 80s music, and the song is actually quite dark and melancholic. Jake's guitar lines on this one are so melodic and expressive, and Ozzy's lyrics, which I think were written by Bob Daisley, but they're just so powerful and evocative, and it's a real strong message to anybody who has something to say about anyone else. Another really good one is Rock and Roll Rebel and the album's closer, Waiting for Darkness. The arrangement on that song is really worth studying because it makes all the parts work together really well, and the way Ozzy's vocals with those awesome evocative lyrics works on top of all of that is just magic. The Ultimate Sin is a bigger, brighter sounding record, and it's full-on 80s metal. You got layered vocals, a bit more lush production with more chorus and reverb, big drums and bass, and the guitars way up front. The downside was that it was perhaps a bit too homogeneous, with a few songs sounding a bit too similar to one another. Commercially, it was a very successful album, and there were some really big songs on there, like the title track and Shot in the Dark. The title track has a killer riff and really original guitar solo, which is more like an elaborate, well-crafted interlude. Ozzy's vocal melodies on that song are just simply brilliant. And you have these really smart arrangements, like in the pre-chorus section where Ozzy repeats that descending motif, down a third, up a second, down a fourth, very cool. And Jake rides the minor 6 chord while Phil Soussan plays a busier ascending bass line. Now, I don't mean this to become like a music lesson, but I do want to point out that there is a real depth to the music here. Phil Soussan was also responsible for the second single, Shot in the Dark, which is a fantastic song. Essentially a cover song, considering Phil brought it in pretty much finished, but Ozzy turned it into gold, like only he could. As good as Jake was, and he was really good, I guess he never really gelled with Ozzy and the band's management, and he wasn't able to endear himself to Ozzy or earn his trust as a musical partner. I imagine that not enough time had passed since Randy's death for Jake or anyone else who might have found themselves in that role to really have a fair shot at doing that. So their collaboration ran its course at the end of that tour, and that takes us to what I always saw as a rebirth of sorts for Ozzy. When Zakk Wylde came into the picture, something must have changed in Ozzy. I think in some ways he might have reminded him enough of Randy without offensively trying to copy him. More than the stance, the blonde hair, the youthful appearance, and the Les Paul, I think it was maybe his enthusiasm, demeanor, and just the right kind of respect while still being his own person that endeared him to Ozzy and Sharon in a way that Jake couldn't or Brad couldn't. And that led to a really, really great album released in 1988 entitled No Rest for the Wicked. The energy, the creativity, and the fire of this album with the late great Randy Castillo on drums reminds me of Blizzard of Ozz. And Ozzy really sounds revitalized, kind of like he'd finally made it out of a 5-year-long stupor. Zakk's playing and writing is so good that we all knew back then immediately that he was going to be a huge star. I mean, people like to joke about the squeals, kind of like they do with Kirk Hammett's wah pedal, but seriously, to play with that kind of mastery and compose such great riffs and solos at 20, 21 years old, with the pressure that came with stepping into the shoes of Jake and Randy, I mean, only a very unique individual could pull that off. If I had to recommend 3 songs from this album, I'd say Miracle Man, Crazy Babies, Tattooed Dancer, and Breaking All the Rules. Yes, that's 4 songs and not 3 because this album seriously kicks ass and you should really just listen to the whole thing. The follow-up album, No More Tears, was released in 1991. And to me, this one was like a second shot at what Ozzy wanted to accomplish with The Ultimate Sin. Only this time, they got it right. The album is really polished, but with a big sound, and the songwriting, for the most part, is really top-notch. When I listen to this album, it's always so obvious that a ton of work went into the writing, the production, and the recording. Ozzy's vocals are really strong across the entire album, and his melodies were so good and so catchy, but even on the more radio-friendly singles, it still sounded very much like the same Ozzy we all knew and loved. He never tried to adjust his way of singing as a way to reach a more mainstream audience. He just wrote and sang what he felt like, whether it was dark and heavy or lighter and more emotional. Aside from the obvious big songs, No More Tears and Mama, I'm Coming Home, I recommend you check out Desire, SIN, and Hellraiser, which also exists as a Motorhead version, as Lemmy co-wrote it with Ozzy, Zakk, and Randy Castillo. He actually co-wrote the lyrics to 4 of the album's songs. Ozzy initially toured to support the album with the Theater of Madness tour, and that was actually the first time I ever saw Ozzy perform live. But after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, he announced his retirement from touring and capped off that part of his career with what was supposed to be his last ever tour. Not one to take himself too seriously and showing an incredible ability to adapt to whatever life threw at him, he dubbed it No More Tours. Fortunately, the diagnosis ended up being false, and just a few years later, Ozzy was back on the road with the Retirement Sucks tour. But we'll get to that part of the story in a future video. As I'm sitting here talking about all this stuff, I'm reminded of just how many memories of all these different phases of my life are forever tied to Ozzy Osbourne and his music. From childhood to adolescence to early adulthood, learning how to play guitar, Ozzy's at the center of all of that. I mean, there are video games on Commodore 64 or Atari that whenever I think of them, I don't hear the game's actual music in my head, but Center of Eternity, I Don't Know, or Little Dolls. And I'm sure many of you watching have a similar thing going. All right, well, I managed to keep it together this far, but I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. So, Ozzy, thank you for literally everything. May you rest in peace, and may your music and legacy go on forever.